All right, guys, welcome back to the podcast, episode number 15. I'm here with co-host Alan. We are sadly without Mr. Cooper this week. He's got some MD bits and pieces that he's got to take care of, so he's left us to it today. But we are joined remotely by Molly Keal from the Down Syndrome Association. Molly, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
Yeah, we're really good. Thank you for taking the time to come and chat with us. The reason why we've set this episode up is we've obviously been in partnership with you guys for quite a while now, which we'll come on to in this episode and the part 2 that goes with it. But we feel we don't really talk about this enough and maybe give it the publicity that we should do. So we wanted to get you on board for an episode and just talk about the amazing work that you guys do. And if other businesses are wanting to get involved, how they kind of go about that as well. And the journey that we've been on with you as well. So if we could just start, for those people that don't know, who are the Down Syndrome Association and what do they do?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Down Syndrome Association is the leading charity in the UK for people with Down syndrome. So we support people right from birth and support right from that stage right to end of life. So my area is in the employment side of things, but we're a huge charity in that we try and cover all aspects of a person with Down syndrome's life. So if you think about all different areas, so there's housing, we support on, as I say, birth and around birth, we support with health and sex and relationships, and of course we support with employment. So we try and cover all those aspects of someone's life.
Okay, cool. I mean, that was actually going to be kind of my next question is, I mean, what would be the main aims of the association? You kind of covered that a little bit, but I'm guessing every case that you guys deal with is different and individual, but what would be the main aims?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of people with Down syndrome, so we work with a huge diverse demographic, and every single person we work with is incredibly different. But the main aim is to support people with Down syndrome to lead full and rewarding lives, and that is across all areas. And a huge part of that as well is advocating for environments which will support people with Down syndrome to thrive. So, as I say, we cover all of those areas in the main objective to really support people with Down syndrome to lead the best lives that they possibly can.
Oh, that's great. So a bit about yourself, Molly. What's kind of a bit of a whistle-stop tour of who you are? What's your background, your career history, etc., up to now where you're working?
Yeah, so I basically started my career in terms of working for quite a small charity, actually. So I work for the Campbell Village Trust, and they support people with many different learning disabilities, actually. And it's very much communal living, and it supports people to lead a meaningful life. So on that site, we had different workshops, we had a community cafe, people had communal gatherings, and it's essentially was to support people to become more independent in their lives and really look at that person on a really unique basis and what can we do with that individual to give them the best life possible. So I went from doing that to, I did my degree in between. So I went to study in Manchester. I studied sociology and social anthropology. My academic research was about people with Down syndrome. And then I actually had a bit of a side change. So I went to work in Punjab in India. I went to teach there for 7 months. And then when I came back, I was obviously very familiar with Manchester, and a role came up with the Down Syndrome Association, which seemed perfect for me. And I've been with the DSA for, it's probably about 5 years now. It's just getting on for 5 years.
Okay, what was the role that kind of piqued your interest with the DSA?
Essentially my first role. So I knew how special people with learning disabilities were at that point because it was my first job. I hadn't taken the conventional route of going straight to university. Essentially, I'd gone into that role and it was obviously very different to what my peers were doing. But I would say I probably learned more in that role than I've ever learned in any type of academia that I've done. I've gone on to do a master's as well. And that first role, essentially, when I was really involved with people's lives on a day-to-day basis and how important it was for people to have a sense of purpose, which probably led me, obviously, to look into employment, because for a lot of people, work is you get up and go. It's why you actually build those connections. It's how you choose to live your life. And it very much fit in tune with my values, really.
So how long have you been with the association for now?
So it'll be just getting on for 5 years. So it's just under at the moment, but I'll be soon getting to my 5-year anniversary with the DSA.
Okay. I mean, should I say, what inspired you initially? What continues to inspire you now to have that get up and go and to keep doing what you're doing?
I think it's when you get to see the journey from the candidates, from when they register. Obviously, we do a lot of support with them, but essentially when you actually meet a candidate, and sometimes our candidates come to us with very little confidence sometimes. Obviously, we have candidates that come to us, especially Luke, that you've got at Adept, who comes with the confidence of about 10 people. Obviously, as I say, our candidates can be more different. But when it actually comes to, meeting the candidate when they first come to us, and then when you see them in work and how much they've matured, how much more independent they are, that's what really inspires me. And our candidates consistently inspire me in that they always don't only meet expectations, but they quite often exceed expectations when they join an employer. And that's very powerful.
100%. So how would your role impact on someone? Say someone comes to you at maybe 16, 17, 18 for the very first time. What kind of steps would you take to then eventually try and get that person into work?
Yeah, so when people first come to us, and probably our lowest, we don't actually have a lowest age limit as such, but most people come to us when they're still studying, as Luke did. So most people, they're still at college and they're wanting to do something to really gain that initial sense of work. So initially we do a very in-depth assessment. So we get to know what have our candidates done previously, what does their current week look like at the minute, and what types of sectors would they like to go into. Now, of course, at that age, I'm sure at 16, I certainly didn't know what I wanted to do. And so we do a lot of work with our candidates around, we have lots of case studies on our YouTube page, so people might look at that. They might also see what types of different sectors that other people with Down syndrome are going into. And we always say to our candidates as well, we never limit anyone. If someone wants to go into a specific industry, we'd always try and make that happen, whether it's that role or whether it's around that sector. So we do a lot of work with candidates around that age. And then we don't just do that assessment. Following that, essentially, we support the candidate right through their employment journey. So we're quite different in that we don't expect our candidates to, say, apply online for positions, or they don't have to sit through a formal interview. Alternatively, they come for a site visit with ourselves, which is very well supported. And then we support candidates when they're placed as well. So I actually did connect with Nick. It must be almost at least 3 years ago in terms of when we're first looking at this. And so we've got to make sure it's the right candidate, the right person for that job. So we skills match very carefully as well. So there's lots of steps before we actually get into obviously placing a candidate.
Yeah, that was going to be, that's a lovely segue to my next question, because sadly Nick's not here to give a bit of an overview. But if you could, from your perspective, just give us an idea of what that journey was like from Nick initially reaching out and then kind of to where we are today, 3 years later.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've known Nick, as I say, for at least 3 years, and he reached out because he'd had a conversation with one of the colleagues at Adepts who had a child with Down syndrome. And essentially he said, he found out about WorkFit, he found out about the Down Syndrome Association, and Adept was one of the companies that said, I'm sure that we can do something. I'm sure that we can support with this. So initially we met. I did the employer assessment with Nick. So we always make sure with our employers that they're suitable. So we always make sure it would be a good fit for our candidates in terms of skill set and making sure the role's right. So we talked through the job description that Nick had in mind. We suggested on reasonable adjustments and made those amendments. And then it was actually probably a couple of years later when Luke appeared. In terms of, as I say, we make sure that we don't put forward anyone. Obviously, of course, that wouldn't work. It's got to be the right candidate. We get to know the workplace culture. We get to know, about your business essentially. And Luke registered, and obviously Luke also comes to the local group. And he was the ideal candidate for Adepts. And that's when, of course, we did the site visit. Luke actually came for a bit of a tour. He met Paul. He met the rest of the team. And obviously, he's quite a character. And I know he's in the background today, but certainly he was the perfect fit for that role. Very front-facing, had the right skill set to do that job, and has thrived since he's joined Adepts. And I'm sure, I know you'll be speaking to him later. It'd be great to hear, obviously, from his perspective too. And we very much keep in contact. So when it comes to that ongoing contact and that ongoing support, we've stayed in touch. We have regular reviews. We check in very regularly to make sure that you've got all the support you need, basically. So that support isn't just for the candidate, but it's also for the employer as well.
Well, that's really good. I mean, were there any difficulties before obviously we identified Luke to come and work at Number One? Were there any difficulties, any blockers that you yourself and Nick came across, or was it a relatively smooth flow to get to where we are?
It was, to be honest, relatively smooth. I think the only barrier that we actually came across was finding the right candidate, because I was very transparent with Nick at the beginning and said, if we haven't got someone that's suitable for this role, and in terms of security and facilities, this was obviously quite a new position. We don't have lots of candidates that work in this industry at the minute, so essentially we needed to look at that role very carefully. But because there's a lot of planning stages, we always try and make sure that we account for any barriers. But really it was about selecting the right candidate. And actually we're now in a position where we've got another fabulous candidate that is also joining you very soon, which is really exciting.
How many people if you've got the number to hand, how many candidates do you have that are working in like security facilities, and what tend to be the more popular markets that you get placements for?
Yeah, so as it currently stands, I'll give you like an approximate number because we work right across England and Wales, but I'd say approximately it's about 15 people. So it's not one of our busiest sectors at the moment, and I think that's probably because of obviously with it being security, there's certain restrictions, there's certain training. But we certainly made that possible with Adept, and that's made possible by having a very strong buddy system. Our candidates do go through the training, although it's adapted. But probably the most popular industries are currently hospitality, logistics. They're probably the top two in terms of which areas do our candidates go into the most. But we do have people that work in all different types of sectors. But as I said, they're probably the most popular.
Okay, I mean, are there a lot of organisations out there that are supporting with this?
Absolutely. So largely when WorkFit started, which was back in 2011, essentially we were contacting lots of people. We were reaching out to various employers and saying, is this something that you'd be able to support with? Whereas actually WorkFit today is very much employer-led. So similar to when Adept actually joined us at WorkFit, Adept registered, and that's the same for many of our employers these days. And we work with quite a lot of national employers, so we work across sometimes at a national level with an employer, which of course, that's something which continually grows really. So we still do a bit of that employer development, especially if a candidate really wants to work with a specific company. But we do have brilliant networks now and brilliant links with employers.
What, if any, are the biggest blockers that you see when you're trying to engage with organisations? Is it a fear or is it an unwillingness to engage? Sorry, is it a fear, a willingness to engage, or is it like a lack of awareness or knowledge on how they can support?
Yeah, I mean, you've summed that up really nicely in some of those suggestions actually around that. So certainly fear comes into it, I think, still now. So sometimes it's easier to not do something if you're a little bit scared of it or you don't know what to expect, than to actually say, okay, we'll give this a go. Now, luckily, we have lots of employers that will come to us and say, let's give this a go. But of course, there's that apprehension. If you've never worked with someone with Down syndrome before, how does that look like? It's very easy for me to say, of course, that's going to be great. And of course, that's going to be easy. But I also have 14 years experience working with people with Down syndrome. So what we do with employers to alleviate some of that fear is we always offer our employer training, which is a very in-depth session. So we cover what actually is Down syndrome, what's the learner profile of someone with Down syndrome, and it's also bespoke to that candidate. So before Luke started, and before Matthew actually joined you as well, we very much went into depth in terms of how you'd actually offer that support. And we also always ensure there's a strong buddy system, and that also reduces some of that in terms of we've never worked with someone with Down syndrome before, so we're not quite sure what to do. So it is largely coming from that, really.
Yeah, I think the buddy system you've touched on there is so important. I mean, myself and I, we see kind of firsthand the buy-in that we have from our teams, and that's absolutely crucial. And that's from the staff, from Paul and his team, but from the client as well. That there's great buy-in from there. I know you were in our Manchester office the other week delivering the training to the guys for MGY. It's Matthew, isn't it, who's joining us soon?
Mm-hmm.
No, but yeah, the buy-in is absolutely key, because I think without that, it's all well and good us pushing these fantastic initiatives, but without the teams then to support the candidates on site, it just falls by the wayside. I mean, have you ever seen that, actually? You know, you don't have to name and shame any organisations, but like where you've got like a company that's fully bought in, fully invested, you do all the training, you identify the candidate, and then the person goes to work and the support network around them just folds.
Yeah, we've rarely had that, because we always make sure when we do that employer assessment that we know about the workplace culture. And even if it obviously has come from something like the director or, you know, the highest person up in the company as such, they always make sure, and we always say, you know, we need to speak to the people that are actually doing this on the ground level. So when it comes to that employer assessment, although sometimes that is with the director or the person that needs to authorise a scheme like this, but it's also, we say, involve those direct managers, so see what the buy-in is. And that's why we say when it comes to buddies, put it out to the team and to see, you know, is this something your team would be comfortable doing? Is this something that your team would be supportive of? And then you can really gauge it. But we sometimes have it where, say, for example, we work with a national employer, and some sites, they'll say, this is not going to work here. The team, you know, they might be a bit unsettled. There might be high staff turnover. That's when it potentially wouldn't work for a candidate, because our candidates quite often need that stability. They need that structure. They need to be seeing those regular people day in, day out. So that's perhaps when it, you know, when it doesn't work as well. But usually employers are very transparent with us about, you know, if a site would be suitable and if it wouldn't, for example.
Okay. So what do the successful placements, what do they end up looking like for the candidates and for the family as well?
Yeah, so it can be very different in terms of, obviously we work across lots of different sectors. So I always say good luck's different in many different contexts. But essentially a successful placement to me, if I'm obviously doing a review, is where our candidate is happy, when they're settled, when there are differences with confidence, when they feel much more independent in the position. So although we have the buddy system, the buddy is designed to facilitate that independence. And say, for example, just to, obviously, I know he's in the room, but with Luke, so when Luke started, he was doing the checks with everyone else. Now he goes off and does those independently. And also to see someone where they're fully integrated with the team. So they know their team, they're confident with the team, they know their routine, and they know what's expected of them. So that would be a successful placement to me, if I was going and doing a review, for example.
Oh, cool. And I suppose kind of selfishly, what would be the benefits that you'd sell to a company for doing these type of placements?
So there are so many benefits. Obviously, I'm hugely biased on this, but in terms of for a company, so more from a corporate perspective, when you bring in people who think differently, when people have different needs, you're not only appealing to obviously that individual, and your team will learn hugely from that experience, but also you start to think differently about the services that you're offering. So, for example, Google, and I'm not doing a selfie Google right now, but one of the things that they did was they worked with the Canadian Down Syndrome Association, so they're our equivalent in Canada. And one of the things they did was they worked on their voice recognition services, and they used lots of voices of people with Down syndrome so they could improve that technology, which then, of course, goes out to a huge market. The amount of people with disabilities in both the UK and nationally, all over the world, actually, that spending power is huge. So if you make your services better, then, of course, actually that appeals, you know, it makes it better. Of course, profits increase. So that's very much from a corporate perspective. But also, when you bring in people who think differently, it also actually encourages diversity in terms of the team. Actually, the team will have a huge learning experience. And although we say it's life-changing for the candidate, it also, for the buddies, for the wider team, they learn so much from that person. And as I say, for the candidate particularly, it is life-changing. And actually to see that person grow, and certainly, I'm sure, as I say, we're speaking to Paul and Luke later, how much in terms of seeing someone grow and their independence is really special. So there are so many benefits in terms of company wide.
And how many placements are there, if you know the number or a rough figure? Does a DSA currently get out there against what you'd like to see? Is there like a goal or number that you guys have in mind?
Yeah, so we are well on our way to 1,000 placements. So that's placing 1,000 people into work. We cover much more people than that, and certainly we'd of course like to see that number increase, and of course we work towards that. But we always make sure the placements are very high quality as well. So we'd much rather do fewer placements where they're very high quality and we can monitor that support and still deliver that at a high level. But as I say, we're well on our way to 1,000, which is brilliant in terms of obviously how long WorkFit's been running for.
Cool. And I suppose a bit of constructive feedback for us. Are we doing enough to publicise the work that we're doing with yourselves and the great story of Luke? Are we doing enough to publicise that to inspire others?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you guys are incredible. I mean, I've just nominated you for the yearly award for the British Association of Support Employment, and that is in recognition of your work as Adepts. I mean, I think one thing which is really special about Adepts is that you are, as a team, so passionate, and whoever I actually meet in Adepts, and this is by placing Luke and also with Matthew, everyone is so supportive and they're so driven. And I think that in itself and getting the word out, I think that you kind of speak it yourself without having to really, scream from the rooftops about it. Of course, you've done the general things. So sharing on social media, I know that you've been recognised at the Greater Manchester Employment Charter for 2 awards, I believe. But certainly, I think where it shines is actually from your people and through actually whoever I meet is so passionate about this and passionate about sharing it with your clients as well. So yes, definitely.
Great feedback.
Yeah, no, that's a really nice endorsement. Thank you. Al, any questions for Molly for you at all?
I think you've answered most of the questions. For me, I just want to say thank you for being there. I think the whole journey and what you're doing for everybody out there that needs support is absolutely amazing, and the difference we see on a daily, weekly basis. We Luke, as he's been working with us, has been tremendous. His confidence has improved. The way he interacts with everybody at every level is absolutely amazing, and we absolutely love it. We love working with you guys.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, we love working with you, and fingers crossed for that award, because it's definitely very well deserved.
When will that get announced? When will we know?
So about a month beforehand. So the awards are in November. So we will find out probably 3 or 4 weeks before. So you'll be the first to know when we've got that outcome.
Oh, fantastic! That's brilliant. Right, well, we'll wrap up there for part 1. Okay. Come in and join us again for part 2, where we'll bring in the star of the show, Luke, and his buddy from number 1, Paul Howard, who comes back for his second appearance.
Absolutely.